Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make everything from the ground up. Today's episode is about ceramics, and it is going to be on this steam engine. I just finished shooting some footage on the passenger car, so I have some leftover parts. If you have not watched that video, please see the link below. It is not nearly as complicated as people think it is. It does look complex and because it has a lot of detail, but for the most part it pretty much starts out the same way that passenger car does, where the same base type of components. There are a couple extra things that you will need in addition to your normal serrated rib and fettling knife that you usually have for just about everything you make with ceramics, you know, and your slip and slip brush. You will need also, because we're working with slabs, your right angle square, a rolling pin, some pipes or dowels, your choice, and some round things to deal with on the rounded features. I'm going to start out by making that same base that I made for the passenger car by cutting a 12-inch by 4-inch base strip and then adding in my little 1-inch undercarriage, which are these guys here, you know, this back piece. And again, when I measured this out, the first thing I had was a raw slab that I had prepped several days in advance, and I gave myself a nice clean edge by going in and cutting a perfect right angle with as least waste as I could, so that I have a 90-degree edge that I can be taking my measurements off of. And I'm just tick marking at the 4, making sure that I keep this edge nice and clean so that I can avoid getting a wonky looking strip. And then I'm going to measure 12. And just like the other one as the undercarriage, I am going to need 1-inch thick strips, so I'm going to make those. I'm placing my train base onto a board with some newspaper, and I'm going to go ahead and put my tick marks at 3/4 of an inch of a line all around the inside of this base. Okay, hope you can see those tick marks there on that camera. Now, I am going to measure the inside marking so I know how long of a strip I need. And in this case, I am at, should be 10.5. I'm going to take those 2 strips that I made, stack them, measure 10.5. And I'm going to score and slip and attach these guys on. Apply my slip. And bam! Smack that on. Making sure I can visibly see that I'm inside of those tick marks. I'm going to grab some fresh coil, fresh chunk of clay, and I'm going to roll some tiny coils and get them into those seam lines to reinforce them. And then roll. I do not need thick coils, I just need enough to get some extra support inside that gap. So thin coil's fine. And you're not going to see this because it's the underside of the train. Then I'm going to take my fettling knife and come in and blend that edge. I'm not putting a coil on the outside because it's going to be visible and I don't want it to be clunky down here or have anything that's going to get in the way of the wheels when I attach the wheels. So, and then I'm just going to eyeball what I think I need for this little insert section. Just use my fettling knife to put a tick mark. That looks good. I'm going to make 2. And I'm going to be sure to score up the sides of those other 2 new pieces I just attached as well as the bottom. Get in here, do some scoring, because it's going to be attaching up to those sides as well, not just sitting on the bottom. I'm just going to give it a pinch. Lay in some coil. And then flip it over and put in that air hole. All right, base is ready to go. The first thing I'm going to determine on this guy here is the cylinder that becomes the main part of the engine. Now to do that, I'm just going to be taking my thinner pipe, getting that wrapped in some newspaper so that the clay doesn't stick, and wrapping some of that slab around the pipe to make that little cylinder. The thing is though, you want this to be a little bit thinner of a slab than the slab that you originally rolled out for this, and also to make drastic curves like this, the slab needs to be a little bit softer. So you don't want it to come to full leather hard. You want to catch it when it's like halfway between fresh and leather hard. So a little bit softer. I'm going to attempt to do it with this stuff and see. It is soft, but I may get some cracking. But we'll see how this goes with that stuff. To make it thinner, I first want to get a gauge for how much of this I need. So yeah, I don't want to waste slab, so I'm just going to take off this extra, get rid of that. And then I want to thin it out just a little bit, and you can do that a couple of ways. You can kind of do this little tossy flippy thing, or you can take a rolling pin and just give it a bit of a roll out. I don't want it too thin, I just need it a little bit thinner than what it is already. Alright, so I got my newspaper, and actually I only need one sheet. I'm just going to fold it in half and then get this rolled up in here. I want to make sure I have a little bit of extra peeking out so that it makes it easier when I have to pull this out of the piece. Alrighty, so there's that, and I'm not taping it or anything, because again, I want to have an ease of being able to yank this out of the tube once it's set up a little bit without damaging the, the tube itself. So I'm just going to take this, get it rolled, take a look at where my line is going to be. You can go ahead and just cut it. And then it's going to meet over here and roll onto itself just a little bit, which is what I want because I need some space to actually slip and score. And I'm not concerned about the way that that's going to look because I'll stick it on the bottom of the train. So here we go. Score. As you can see, I got quite a bit of crackings because I am using slab that is probably a little past the point of using for this. We're going to make it work here. You want to probably use something a little bit fresher than this. Alright, once I've done that, I'm going to come in and squish my seam. And you can use the flat back end of the serrated rib to blend here. And that should also help you remove lots of that cracking that's happening. Alright, and this is what you want. You want this sticking up because we're going to set this outside in the sunlight for about 10 or 15 minutes to get a little bit firmed up, and then I'll be able to yank this out having this little bit of newspaper here. I'm going to be working on this back end while this is curing out in the sun. So, alright, we'll be right back. Okay, so back here in this section, that is actually where I'm going to put this whole chamber. So the hole is going to be positioned right here over where this box is in this section. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually cut my round for the back portion. For that piece, I am going to cut a 3.5 inch by 4 inch little rectangle, and then I will put a round on it. So very similar to keeping the same dimensions that I put onto the passenger car, just because I want to make sure that when they are lined up together, visually they all have that same size and shaping. So I'm just using up some of that extra slab I had saved from earlier, and I'm going to use that to cut a 4 inch by 3.5 inch rectangle. So now I need to give it that curve, and I'm using my trusty roll of tape to just line up here. And now I have that curved piece. And I really enjoy having this back open chamber. It's kind of like where the engineer would be who's driving this train. I'm gonna just move this up a little bit to give myself that room to put that little back section in, and then make a couple little blocks in here to just get it stabilized before I go and attach this little roof part. So to figure out what I need for these stabilizing little blocks that are going to help keep this upright, I'm just going to measure from where the edge of this little curve stops down to the base, and that's basically the height of what I need. So here we go. 2¼ inches. Just check the other side. Yeah, about 2¼ inches. 2¼ is going to be my height, but then I need to determine how wide. I think I'm going to go with 1.5. That looks kind of nice. So 1.5 by 2¼ inches on. I'll do the 2¼ first. And because I only need 1.5, I probably can get both pieces out of this little bit here. Alright, so I'm going to slip and score all of this section on. And at this point I want to make sure I'm keeping a close eye on the time, because that piece that I set outside I don't want out there for longer than 15 minutes. If I do so, it will dry up way too quickly, and then we're going to have some problems on getting it to release, or getting it to not crack essentially. And then, as always, I'm going to reinforce with some coil. Both on both sides of this, I can actually reinforce with coil and clean it up after. So let's pipe it in the front first so you can see it coming in to the front. And again, I don't want to forget the verticals. Everywhere I can get that coil pumped in, I'm going to get it in there, because that's what's stabilizing my piece. And I'll come in with that fettling knife to make this a little bit cleaner than I normally would when it's a spot that's not going to be seen. I'm going to do that trick where I figure out how much I need to kind of lap over by placing my ruler here, kind of slowly rocking it across. And it looks like for this guy I need roughly 5 inches. So pretty much, since I'm using the same top arc, it should be fine. And again, I'm going to give it a little bit of an overhang, just like I did on the passenger car. I just think aesthetically it kind of looks cool to have that little bit of extra. So I'm going to do 6 inches instead of the 5. So I need only a 2-inch strip. Going to do that, and I'm actually going to put in that slight undercut, just like I did on the base train here with this backing out piece. So I cut this a little too shy. I should remedy that. All I'm going to do is take my rolling pin, roll this out just a little bit, thin it out a bit, and that should give me enough little bit of extra to go ahead and chop off the back section. I'm going to find the center of this piece first. Now that I've extended it a little bit, it's a little bit wider than 6. It's actually 6 and 1/4. So I'm gonna just trim it down first. And then I want the halfway point. So I'm gonna go in and put a tick mark at the 3. And that is just a positioning point. Now I know the width of that train is going to be 4 inches. And so that means that from the inside of where that undercut is to the outside is going to be 4 inches. So I'm going to center the 2-inch mark here so that I can put a tick mark at the edge and then at the 4. So this should be the center. And then 2 inches to cut in. And I should be able just to remove this chunk here, which will give me that little bit of back edge play. Okay, so I'm going to slip and score this guy on and then reinforce the inside with some coil. This is flopping around a lot, but once I get the little chunk brick on here, it'll help stabilize this a lot more. At the moment, I'm gonna go and check on a piece of the main engine part that's sitting out in the sun, make sure that it hasn't been overcooked out there. All right, that seemed okay. I just rotated it a little bit so that the opposite side was in the sun. So I'm gonna move on to making this little car, the little bit that goes inside. And then looking at the model, there's not much of a step in. There is some, but not much. Probably about 1/2 inch in. So that means that I'm gonna go with 3 inches. Actually, I'm making it 2.5. I'm gonna go 2.5 so that it can step in a little bit more on each side and it'll position here. So, and we're gonna cut up some scrap pieces that are 2.5. That's probably okay. I guess we'll just keep it with a 2.5 by 2.5 square. Check that. Yeah, I'm happy with that. All right, so I'm gonna make 2 more of these little squares. Grab that main train and get that back here. Here we go. Now I do not need to put anything here because that's going to be a wall, and actually smacking slab on top of slab is not a good idea. It will most likely have an air pocket in there and blow off in the kiln. So all I'm going to be doing is setting up these sides like this to create this chamber, but I also need to ensure that the air hole is positioned properly and it can still come through. And for this case, yes, it's going to be fine. I don't need to chop an air hole back here because this is staying open. So right now, as of yet, there's no chamber of trapped air until this goes on over, and because that air hole is positioned right over it, it's going to be just fine. Before I smack this side on, I'm going to get my hand in here and get some coil in, because once that side goes on, it's going to be a lot harder for me to get in there. So new soft coil. This does not have to be pretty. Again, no one's going to see this part because it's going to be inside of that box. Now I can get that piece on. And to do this, because my hands are going to be way too small to get in there, I'm just going to throw this coil inside and use the fettling knife to blend it in for me. Oh, let's see if I can. It's not exactly the best way because you're not getting as great a pressure, I don't think anyway. Now I need to get a piece over the top of that, and I think I want to take some of that thinner stuff. I don't want it too thick, so. too much here. Just trim that. And that should go. Alrighty. Alright, so that chamber is on, and now I'm going to go and get the steam chamber bit. It should be good and ready for me to work this out. There we go. And now I can measure. And I know it's going to come to here. I could just rotate it a couple times. Get that measurement in the same spot. And then take this knife and just kind of go along, completing that score line several times, and then I will begin to cut in. And the back end I can trim it up a bit just to get it nice and even. And that's gonna rest itself here. Now here's the problem. Once I attach this and this gets a front, that's gonna be a solid chamber, right? So in order to make that air flow through, I gotta poke a hole in here. So that this way, with this hole, where this chamber goes, air will be able to flow up and through into that and then out of there. So also, I should be able to finagle my finger inside there to help get this attached properly. So I want to make sure that's going to go that way. I am going to score and slip and attach that bit on. I'm going to pull this towards the edge so I can not disrupt the base. I'm going to slide this to the edge to where I'm free and can get under here into that hole, and then I'm going to go in and squish a bit of coil in between and under this train. I don't want to lose the definition of the curvature of this part of the steam engine, so I'm trying really hard to retain that line while also getting coil in there for stabilization. Almost there. I am just going to finish piping this in, and then we're going to put a cap here. Oh, and I have to attach that bit of the front train carriage before we can set this aside to stiffen up a bit. Any of the really large major details I want to attach right off. If it's a small minor detail or something a little bit smaller as far as the add-on component goes in, well, that's what I'm going to consider in my detailed part after this is set up. So the first thing you got to do is kind of build the skeleton, I guess. I want to clean this up. I want to make these curves look nice and smooth. I can't do that if I start putting all of these little bits of elements all over the place. What I want to do is get it roughly together, let it stiffen up a bit, and then I can come back and deal with my details. So I got to get this flipperoo bit of the front part of the train carriage. And so I'm just going to take some 4-inch bit of slab here, which actually this way should be 4. I will take that dowel. I'm going to roll this up with a little bit of that dowel just to get some of that curve. And then it looks like this kind of bends backwards just a bit for the lights. Gotta be really careful at flipping this over and trying to get some coil work into that underside, but I don't want to damage my train, so I'm going to be really careful at doing this part because I'm working with something that is still a little bit soft. Get that good and rough blended. And then on the original, I actually have a couple wheels sitting there to help stabilize this bit. I'm not going to add those until after. So in the meantime, just to make sure that this stays good and stable, I am going to put a chunk of waste clay in there just to stabilize it and hold it up. So that chunk's going to go under there. And I'm going to just take this, trace a circle around, bit of a circle, chop that up. And then that's going to get scored and slipped, and then the whole thing wrapped in plastic and set aside for at least a couple of days to stiffen up, and then I can come back, clean it up, and get those add-on details on. Alright, we're back to clean up the engine, and unlike the passenger car, I am not going to be using a shore form to attack this thing just because of the shape of it. It's just not practical to use the shore form. So I will be using fettling knife and my rubber rib to just come in and do a bit of smoothing. And that'll take care of the bulk of the smoothing and getting things pushed around. And as long as you caught this at the right point, you should be able to manipulate some of the clay with just this rubber rib. Come in, and I really want to be gentle when it comes to this front carriage. You don't have to have this front carriage on your train. It's just this style of train that I'm working with actually had it on there, so that's why I did it. Looks like my front bit's almost a little too dry to be scraping away. If it is this dry, you really should spritz this down with some water and wrap it up for about 5 or 10 minutes until this loosens up a bit. I'm not going to do that because this is just for the sake of the demo, just to show you how I'm going to be adding on the other pieces. Okay. So, the first thing I'm going to be doing is popping on some wheels. I am not going to go crazy and go over every tiny little detail of this train, but I will go over some of the basic highlights of what you'll be putting onto most engine car trains. So I'm going to go over these larger wheels. Making a larger wheel is going to be very similar to making a smaller one. It's just going to vary on the size circle that you're going to use. So I'm going to be using this PVC pipe to do the bottom half of those larger wheels, and then I have a tape roll to use as a tracer just for this top half of the wheel well. So to begin with, I'm going to take some of my softer slab that's super thick, and I am going to roll it out a bit thinner. And then I'm going to use that PVC pipe to trace. I prefer my needle tool here for this job. Once I have traced my larger wheel, fortunately for the PVC, it's actually given me this halo line, and you could get it on there and just give it a little bit of pressure, and it should, yeah, there we go, put that line in for you. So that's one step out of the way. You can retrace that, and then you want to expose a little bit more than half of the wheel. So I'm going to come in here and just put in this shadow line. I'll be cutting that bit off, but right here should be the center point. And then I'm going to come in and draw my spokes. Now the next step is to remove this material. You can do that with the tip of the fettling knife. And clean it back up. If you have one of these little looped pick tools, these work out really great to kind of help gouge up. If you don't have it, that's fine. You can just use your needle tool or your fettling knife here. I'm just using my finger to blend out a little bit of those, keep those spokes nice and clean. Just to give me that little drop in the center of that wheel well. And then you can use either your needle tool or your fettling knife to come in and cut away this piece. So I'm going to use to have this little bit of a blade that's attached to that tool I was using. X-Acto knife probably be really handy here as well, or some kind of a regular utility blade. And then I'm cutting across that line, so I end up with this half a spoke wheel. And just to get those little bits off, you can come in and scrape a little bit with your fettling knife. smooth it around with your fingers, and then that is good to go. And that would be one of your wheels that are going to sit right here under that wheel well. So that would get slip and scored and attached. To do the smaller ones, you essentially would just be carving the whole wheel, and the whole wheel would be then cut out, and those would go here at the tip end of the train down towards this end. So let me show you how to put on the little wheel well that goes over this where the wheel sits. Using that same stuff, but now I have a roll of tape that has a little bit larger of a circle here, and I am just going to come in and cut around my roll of tape. And you can use anything that you can find circle-wise that will get the job done. And I'm just going to cut. I know this is oversized, but I just want to be able to have a piece so that I can eyeball the fitting. If you guys are looking at that, this is going to sit over here, and you need to kind of eyeball how much you're going to be taking off. And it looks like I'm probably going to chop off much there. Okay. And then that bit would just also get slip and scored down to hover over wherever that wheel fitting is going to be. Slip and scored, and there you go. For the underside, I did attach two little wedges of a quarter of a wheel in here just to add as a little bit of extra support that I slip and scored in this area. This main section here where the wood and where the furnace is, there's no windows put on it. So back here in this section would be your window. I am just going to draw in a little box, grab my loop tool, and shallow carve at that section. Can then also come in and add a little detail. Maybe there's a panel here or something. Sometimes I like to just use my wooden stick here to widen my lines so the detail really shows up. Looks more intentional other than just this little tiny scratching that the needle tool sometimes makes. Alright. So the top of my engine has that knob that sits at the top. So for that, I am just going to take some leftover clay and cut a tiny circle. Probably just use that tire wheel. Who's crying? Yeah, my son has just gently gifted me this lovely lizard. I am now going to go set it free. He is alive. He's just pretending to not be because he's afraid of my cats. So I will be back in a moment. Where was I? Okay, onto the circle stack thing where the smoke comes out. So traced that washer, and now I'm going to just cut it out. And then I am actually going to just take the fettling knife and make a little bit of a notch here all the way around. That's my guideline of where not to pinch. And then I'm going to pinch around this underside and then roll it between my fingers a little bit, round it, and I can come in and press down, give it a little bit more shape, and then I can add any details that I want to add to that bit. But then also there's a little bit of a larger circle of like a flange that sits underneath this. So I'll take some of my thinner stuff, and I have a bit of a bigger washer here. Again, it's just finding any circles you can find pretty much to get the job done. And I'm gonna trace that larger circle. And then I want to soften those edges a little bit, so I'm just going to pinch them out. And then this whole thing, I will slip and score that part there, and then slip and score this part here. And there's the smokestack. And then I can put in another one here and then go crazy with just some detail carving. I could spend the next hours here showing you all of the little details that you could add to the train, but you want to make it yours. So this is just the basic general components that you would find in making an engine car, and then the rest, use your imagination to go in and carve in all of those other little finite details. That's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have not done so, please subscribe so you can see many more videos to come.